Thank you for joining me for today's episode of the Simply Financial Podcast. This is your host, Christopher Calandra, and I hope to increase your financial IQ with today's episode, which covers debt to income ratio. This term may sound familiar to you because it's often used, well, more than often, it's usually used by lenders when they're trying to underwrite a loan. Most commonly, you're going to probably come across this with mortgages, but it's a key financial metric to measure a person's ability to manage debt. So it is expressed as a formula. Now, formulas are tough to give verbally, so follow me on this. It's fairly straightforward, but it is expressed as a percentage. A debt to income ratio is expressed as a percentage. And you take your total debt payments and you divide it by your gross monthly income and you multiply it by 10, and that gives you your debt to income ratio. And what lenders want to see is a lower number. That means that you have a lower percentage of your income is allocated to debt service payments. So a common thing historically has been 1/4, rent. If you're getting 4 paychecks a month, if you could get it where one goes to rent, you're in very good shape. I know lots of people will not necessarily be able to do that exactly, but you could understand this commonsensically. You probably don't want to have rent or a mortgage payment that is 3 of 4 paychecks every month. The math is simply not going to work. Digging into the details a little bit more, there are 2 categories of debt to income ratio you normally see. The first one is front end, and then I'll talk about back end. Front end debt to income calculation includes only housing. And as I just described in a more simplistic manner, lenders prefer to see 28% or lower in the front end debt to income ratio. So they basically look at your spending, look at your budget, but they're only looking at housing, rent and or mortgage. About 1 of 4 paychecks a month, as I said before, the more exact number is 28%. So that's the front end debt to income ratio. There's another one that lenders often look at, and that's back end. And that, I believe, is a little more robust. That includes all monthly debt. So that not only in the calculation would include housing, like the front end calculation, but it would include other payments, credit cards, car loans, student loans, etc. Lenders prefer in the back end calculation to see 36% or lower. There are possibilities to get loans if it's higher. So to give you some guidance here, if you're below 36%, you're generally going to be categorized as excellent, strong financial standing. A debt to income ratio using the back end formula of between 36 and 43% is probably going to be viewed as manageable, and you're likely to get approved. When you get to 43 to 50% back-end debt-to-income ratio, you're in the risky category and approvals get harder. And I would submit to you that even if you could get approval, if you're in this 43 to 50% range, you might think very carefully whether you are financially making the right decision with this debt that you're looking to take on, or perhaps getting rid of other debt that you have, because you're in the red line area. This is risky territory. 50% or above in terms of debt to income ratio using the back end formula is considered high risk, unlikely to get approved for loans. And in these last 2 categories, 43 to 50% and 50% plus, you're also likely to get higher interest costs to accommodate the lender's extra risk for lending you the money. And sometimes we'll find people that have credit card debt that's 20% above, or they'll have car loans that are 9, 10, 11, 12%. It's really hard to get ahead when you have that kind of interest rate. Plus, it's an indication that you likely have a lot of other debt that's making your finances very fragile. I believe, and this is conventional wisdom, that no debt is the best debt to income ratio. I have been debt free for a while now, but I had debt during my life. Managing debt is a key part of building wealth and making your way through the different life cycles. But if you could get to the point of debt free, that's a very positive turn of events and a strong indication that you're financially secure. If you've listened to this podcast or if you're a client of ours, we love it when we can have a plan and help our clients be debt free as they enter into retirement. If you could do it earlier, that's great. It might be unrealistic to do it in your 20s and 30s, but no debt is the best debt to income ratio if you could drive that number down to 0%. A couple of final thoughts. There is a trap with this. And that is a lot of people judge affordability on a purchase based on if they could afford the monthly payments. And the trap is that they may not be taking into account. They often don't take into account how many years they'll be making that payment. Because if you have, let's say, a $30,000 car loan and you look at a 3-year payment, well, the payment will be higher and that might scare you off. And you might opt for a lower payment where you have a 6 or 7 year car loan. But that means you're going to pay for longer on the car. You have that expenditure for longer, which is not necessarily good. And that means you'll pay over the course of that 6 or 7 year loan way more in interest cost than you would in a 3-year loan. So the trap is often people just look at the monthly payment, and if they can afford it, they feel comfortable. The trap is longer payments are not necessarily a good thing. And it also obscures in many instances what the interest rate is, because if you could afford the number you ignore the interest cost that you're paying, you may not be getting ahead financially. So that's the last tip I have for this episode. Thanks for listening to today's episode. I'll be back with you on the next episode of the Simply Financial podcast. In the meanwhile, please subscribe to the show if you haven't done so already. Thanks again.
The views expressed are not necessarily the opinion of Osaic Wealth, Inc., and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned herein. Investing is subject to risks, including loss of principal invested. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. No strategy can assure a profit nor protect against loss. Please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information should be relied upon when coordinated with individual professional advice. Please note, the information being provided is strictly as a courtesy. When you link to any of the websites provided here, you are leaving this website. We make no representation as to the completeness or accuracy of information provided at these websites. Nor is the company liable for any direct or indirect technical or system issues or any consequences arising out of your access to or your use of third-party technologies, websites, information, and programs made available through this website. When you access one of these websites, you are leaving our website and assume total responsibility and risk for your use of the websites you are linking to. Securities and advisory services are offered through Osaic Wealth, Inc., member FINRA, SIPC. Insurance services offered through Elliott Wealth Management Services, LLC, not affiliated with Osaic Wealth, Inc.